Susannah Fullerton. There she is in Sydney, Australia, a place where many people love cats. And Philippa Sandel told me about your book. She's one of the great listeners to my shows. And this book has so far exceeded my expectations. I thought it would be, a friend telling a friend about a kind of a sweet little book. It's called Great Writers and the Cats Who Own Them. It is an absolutely beautiful book, Susannah. You must be so pleased with how it came out. I mean, it's just substantial and it feels good in the hand and the typeface is lovely. And there's even what we used to have in the Michelin guide, there's even a ribbon to hold your spot, which I love because it is a book where you would dip in and read about these extraordinary writers that you've dug up from, I don't know even how you did it, internet or no internet. You are one great researcher. And it transports us down paths of the lives of a great array of writers who the cats weren't just like lawn ornaments, so to speak. I mean, you talk about the importance of these cats to the writers' lives. I mean, from the beginning of their life to the end of their life, woven right through it. Were you a historian to begin with?
A literary historian in that I give talks about famous writers and their lives. I lead tour
Oh,
groups to all sorts of places around the world, including the USA, and
wow.
all the tours are connected with famous writers, their homes, libraries where their manuscripts are. So I've always been crazy about the lives and the works of great writers. And I also happen to love cats. So suddenly the two sort of came together, and I thought, oh, that could make an interesting book. So it was huge fun choosing the 17 different writers in my book. And I've tried to have a variety, male, female, American, Canadian, Scottish, English, and one from New Zealand to finish it all off, because that's where I'm from originally.
A
And I
Kiwi.
really loved doing the research and then, of course, writing some of the very quirky and funny stories about these authors. And I hope that what I've done in my book is show a different side to these famous authors. Everyone knows, of course, that Mark Twain was a brilliant writer, but does everybody know that when he stayed in hotels, he rented kittens so that he always had kittens to play with? And when a cat was sleeping on his billiard table, and he loved the game of billiards, he devised special rules to go with the cat on the table. Of course, if you hit the cat with a ball, then you lost the game. So he had special billiard rules to go with his cats. So I just loved all of those quirky, funny, interesting stories, and I wanted to share them in my book.
Well, they're quirky and they're funny, but they're also really in depth. And it now makes more sense to me how you didn't just gather them from page one out of the blue. I mean, that this would have been a whole life's work, but your life's work has been authors and the literary world. And what a great thing that you take these tours. What's the name of your company? I mean, people that are listening might say, yeah, I'll get the book Great Writers and the Cats Who Own Them, but I want to go on one of those literary tours. It sounds great.
I run the tours through a company based in Australia called Australians Studying Abroad. So you can look up on their website to find my literary tours. This year I've got tours in Sicily and in Spain, but I've got some
Wow.
wonderful English tours coming up. And I do often have Americans coming on my tours. So yeah, you can fly to the UK, meet the tour group, and join a really fantastic literary tour. So they're huge fun to do.
It really sounds special. And for Americans that are maybe a little sick of being around just other Americans, it's really thrilling to be in a tight-knit group, all with a shared kind of goal or mission. And they're not Americans. So you're learning a lot about other cultures as well as history, which is
I,
really,
I did a
really
tour
amazing.
once in the deep south of America, and I even had Americans join in that tour because they had not found anywhere a literary tour of the deep south that was as appealing. So it was wonderful having Americans join that tour.
Well, yours sound really extraordinary. And in reading two of the chapters that just had personal meaning to me, I was really amazed by how much more I learned than what I thought I already knew about those writers. Now, one of them is Ernest Hemingway. My father was his surrogate son and wrote his biography
Wow.
called Papa Hemingway. And my entire life was pretty much overshadowed by my father's son relationship with Ernest. And he went absolutely everywhere with him, together with him, which is what his book
My goodness.
Hemingway was about.
Wonderful connection.
But I knew about the cats in Key West, which I also kind of thought, if I understood correctly, have become a tourist attraction. And they really aren't all cats that were his. And the whole thing about six toes, I was skeptical. But then I read this chapter, Boise, who was a Christmas treat for Ernest Hemingway. And you have a really long, very meticulously detailed and researched chapter about the various homes that Ernest had where cats began with one and became many double digits. And you talk about La Finca in Cuba, which my father went to many times with him, and there were pictures around our house. Talk a little bit about how you did that research because it's very precise.
Thank you. Well, it was great fun. I have actually been to his house in Cuba, so I was able to picture it in my mind. But the house just became totally overrun with cats. And in the end, he built a tower in the grounds so that the cats could stay in the tower, except for Boise. Boise was number one top cat, and he was always allowed wherever he wanted to be, on Ernest Hemingway's chest, on his lap, on his desk, sitting on manuscripts, wherever he liked. But I read different biographies, obviously did searching online, but you've got to be careful what you find there. It's not
Sure.
always accurate. So you look at letters. Obviously, I turned to his book, Islands in the Stream, where his cat Boise just goes straight into the book.
That's right.
So he doesn't even change the cat's name, and it's a wonderful tribute to his cat. So yes, Ernest Hemingway, who we think of as such a macho man, the hunting, the shooting, the fishing,
Right.
was such a softie when it came to his cats. So I'm delighted with your wonderful Hemingway connection, that you enjoyed that chapter so much.
Well, I enjoyed all of the layers of it, learning about the house in Cuba and how one wife had the cat sterilized, which you really should do if you're living with cats. But of course, if you're a macho man or in that era, people didn't really neuter and spay cats as much. And then his wife Martha Gellhorn was the one who had them sterilized and she was out. So then Mary Hemingway came along. She was the one that I knew because she was sort of from my era. And she loved the cats as well, but you didn't admit whether she actually just loved them because she needed to, or whether she really loved them. But it was a lot of cats. And then you talk about Idaho, and then he populated Idaho with cats.
I don't think Hemingway would have married any woman who didn't like cats.
Yeah.
And of course, he calls some of his heroines in his fiction Catherine. It was his favourite name because it could be shortened to Cat or Kit or Kitty. And it's actually thought that the very last words that Ernest Hemingway ever spoke before he took his own life was kitten, or cat. So he really did worship his cats, and it was great fun following his cat journey in writing that chapter. So, what was the other chapter that you
Other
particularly
one
connected with?
was Muriel Spark, who's someone that we don't hear much about in America. She became Dame Muriel Spark, and I knew her when I had a house in Tuscany, and she and Penelope would come to dinner. And I didn't know her life before she lived in Tuscany, but I had a similar problem with cats living in the countryside in Tuscany, that either the hunters shot at them or they poisoned them. Cats and dogs, actually. They didn't like roaming animals. They were real farmers, and they viewed all of that as bothering the crops or bothering the nests of a bird that they wanted to shoot. But you write about her and her whole life, and you I think it's really important, particularly for Americans, to learn about her. She was incredibly brilliant and one of a kind, and her books are unparalleled. But as a literary woman yourself, you've been aware of her for a long time. I really appreciate that you bring her into this company because she was special. The books she wrote were, well, I mean, have you ever done anything around it on your literary tour?
Yes, indeed. I've taken literary tours to Scotland, and of course, you walk the streets of Edinburgh and you're in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie.
Oh,
And I
right.
think, interestingly, that novel, Jean Brodie herself is incredibly cat-like,
Oh,
reserved, elegant, sleek. And so, even though there's no physical cat in the novel, I think Jean Brodie is sort of the cat figure of that novel. But yes, Muriel Spark was a brilliant writer. And she had a very intense relationship with her beautiful cat, Bluebell. She wrote poems about Bluebell. She enthused about Bluebell in her letters. And she grieved terribly when Bluebell died. So she wrote very movingly of her cat's death. And that, of course, is a feature of my book. Cats sadly do
yeah.
go off to cat heaven or wherever it might be. And authors are left to grieve. And because authors are people who naturally express themselves in writing, so many of them write wonderfully. Another example of that is Doris Lessing, another
Yeah.
intriguing author who I
Yes.
include in my book. She won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and her very beautiful cat, a very large cat called El Magnifico, ended up getting a tumour and had to have one of his legs amputated. And Doris Lessing wrote a wonderful novella, just a little long short story or slim novel called The Old Age of Il Magnifico. And she just writes so superbly of the struggles of her disabled cat in managing things like stairs or jumping up onto her bed the way he always used to. It's a really exquisite piece of writing. And she watched her cat, she observed how it was coping, and she wrote of the cat with such understanding and sympathy, and it really is quite wonderful. So sometimes the tragedies connected with cats are immortalized by different authors. And a great favorite of mine is L.M. Montgomery. I'm a huge Anne of Green Gables fan. She adored cats. She judged people by their responses to cats. And she wrote extraordinary cat obituaries in her diary when any of her beloved cats died. So she even dedicated one of her novels to her cat. So she was another cat tragic. And again, it was great fun following her journey.
Well, your mind is just a treasure trove, and I imagine when you have these literary tours, you're just regaling people the whole time with stories like you just told. I mean, I would never have known or paid attention to the author of Anne of Green Gables, but it's a classic, classic, classic in every English-speaking country, and you give her this stage on which to
Well,
shine. You know, it's
taking
amazing that you can give a lot of these authors attention that they may not have had for decades.
taking a literary tour group to Prince Edward Island and walking through the haunted wood and then coming up and seeing in front of me Green Gables
You just gave me chills.
reduced me to tears. I was just
Oh
a
my.
basket case. I saw the Lake of Shining Waters. I saw all the places connected with the novel, and I just kept crying. I was so overcome. And a lot of the tour group were very overcome as well. It was a wonderfully exciting moment.
Well, you bring brains and heart to all of these stories. And when I was reading some of them and they were so in depth, I thought, where did she get all this information? You tell it like you've just always known it. Like, you know, you come from an oral tradition of knowing every single intimate detail of these quite extraordinary and, as you said, very diverse authors from the
I
point of
love the
view of the
personal
past.
stories of
Yeah.
Yeah, I
They're very
really love the personal stories of authors, and I wanted to show the side of their personality that related to the cats. So hopefully that's what I've achieved in my book, and also to show what pieces of literature were inspired by the
yeah.
cats. So whether they were put into short stories or novellas or poems or essays, there's a huge variety of literary works that have been inspired by cats. So there were some authors that I thought I would probably include in the book, but then I found I struggled to get enough information about one particular favorite cat. And then I felt, well, I can't really make a whole chapter out of that. One example was T.S. Eliot, famed, of course, for his
Oh,
love of
right.
cats and creating what became the musical Cats from all of his poems about cats. But I really struggled to get information about one particular cat or even the names of the cats that he owned or was owned by. And so in the end, between the chapters of my book, I've got these little sort of
Oh,
interludes
I
or
like them.
pauses,
They're
as I
great.
call them, with information about cats and in theatres and libraries, bookshops, the very first cat flap, all sorts of information about quirky information about cats. So T.S. Eliot ended up going into one of those little interludes, but I simply couldn't do a whole chapter on him because I didn't find the information. And I would have absolutely loved to have included my very favourite author of all time, Jane Austen, in the book. But Jane Austen made one reference to a kitten on a stairway in a lodging house in Bath. It was a black kitten, we don't know its name, and there was no way I could turn that into a chapter. But Jane Austen has a way of creeping into all my books, so there are some references to Jane Austen.
That's so funny. And you have a great index. So it has the name of everybody and what page they're on. If you have a favorite author and you're wondering, that is a great explanation about T.S. Eliot. It did cross my mind. I thought, well, I'll get to it, and it wasn't there. But you have a very high bar because you want to know one special cat and you want names. You don't
Yeah.
want just
And
somebody who's written a lot of
I
poems.
needed quotes and information so that I could extend it into a chapter. But in the end, with the 17 authors that I've got in the book, I've got some French writers,
Yeah.
Colette and Alexandre Dumas. They were fun to write about. A real range of different authors. I've got, of course, Americans with Twain, with Hemingway. I've got Margaret Mitchell, who, as well
Yes.
as writing Gone with the Wind, loved cats. Paul Gallico, who wrote the gorgeous children's book Jenny about a boy who turns into a cat. That's a really
I didn't know
beautiful
that
piece of
book. Is
writing.
is
Oh,
that
read
well
it.
known
It's
in England?
beautiful.
In America, that's, I don't think, a well-known book at all. Sounds
No,
great.
it's
It
not
sounded great.
incredibly well known here anymore, but it is sort of a classic of cat literature, and it is well worth reading. I loved it. So yes, I've got a great range, and I had so much fun writing the book. And of course, it was the most incredible thrill when it was accepted for publication by the Bodleian Library in Oxford. They have, as you said, done a really beautiful
Oh,
job
it's
producing it.
gorgeous.
Not only that bookmark, but the opening flaps have
Yes.
little cat paw prints all over them. There's a gorgeous cat on the spine if you take the cover off. It
Oh, I
really
didn't
is a
know that.
no. It
That,
took me a good week
oh,
before
isn't
I
that
found
gorgeous?
that.
The golden cat on the
Yes, it's a
spine.
golden cat.
Wow.
So I was
I think
so thrilled that they published it, and
it's
really,
very
it's been
classy.
selling incredibly well to my absolute delight. So yeah.
Well, as you know, your first printing actually sold out. So we had to struggle to get a copy to me, which I thought, well, that's really a good problem to have.
It
Unlikely.
is a nice problem for an author to have, and all the reviews have been absolutely lovely. So, that, of course, is also a real thrill. But what I'm busy with now is a dog book. So, I'm writing
Oh,
about
goody.
great writers and the dogs who love them. So, I'm now having a lot of fun with
Oh.
dogs in the same way that I had with cats.
Oh, we are going to love having that book. In terms of the reviews, I imagine that some people, especially because it comes out of an august university press, they were looking for errors. And I'm guessing that they not only didn't find any, but they read things they didn't know. I mean, I think that's one of the beauties of the book. It's like, really? And that too? I mean, it's kind of extraordinary when you said that you read a lot of books. Obviously, books you had not yet read, biographical type books. So
Hmm.
did you go to a library like in the olden days and physically
Yes,
look at
I'm a
reference
great
books?
great fan of libraries, so I spent a lot of time in libraries, going through letters, diaries, and then, of course, finding information about cat care, which I tried to include in my book as well. One of the authors in the book is Robert Southey, who was poet laureate at the time of, he was friendly with Wordsworth and Coleridge and people like that. And his cat Rumpelstiltskin becomes ill. But what did you do in the early 19th century when your cat became sick and you lived in the Lake District? There were no vets.
That's a great
So,
point. Yeah.
when was kitty litter first invented, and how did somebody like Southey deal with the toileting needs of his cat? So I tried to include historical information about cat care. When was the very first book of cat care ever written? That's in my book as well. So I wanted to have that sort of background information about caring for cats, the prestige of cats. The book starts with Dr. Samuel Johnson.
Yes,
In
and the
18th century
oysters.
London, many cats were ill-treated. There was still a bit of a hangover that cats belonged to witches or they were connected with the devil. They had a pretty tough life of it in London, but not Dr. Johnson's Hodge. Dr. Johnson adored Hodge, fed him on oysters. There's a wonderful statue of Hodge. Look him up online outside the Dr. Johnson Museum. He's sitting on top of a copy of Dr. Johnson's dictionary, and there are a couple of empty oyster shells at his side.
Oh, that's
So
lovely.
Hodge was one of the very lucky cats of 18th century London, but so many cats were badly treated. Stones were thrown at them by street kids. It was a tough life for a cat in 18th century London. Gradually, in the Victorian era, the treatment of cats improved, people became kinder to them. Gradually, laws were put in place that would protect animals. The RSPCA and organisations like that began to appear. So I wanted to give a lot of that background information to put the cats into the historical perspective. You can, of course, read the chapters in my book in any order, but
Right.
the authors are in chronological order. So it is probably best to start at the beginning and go through to the end in the right order, because then you get that historical picture of, the way in which cats were regarded and cared for in England. I have to say, one of my very favourite chapters to write was Edward Lear. I think of all the
Oh,
cats in the book, the one I became fondest of was his overweight and half-tailed cat called Foss. And Edward Lear, as a wonderful artist, did some superb pictures of Foss. That's spelled Foss. Look up his Wikipedia page. The cat has his own Wikipedia page.
oh my
And there
goodness.
will be some of the gorgeous illustrations done by Edward Lear, who was a lonely man. He suffered from epilepsy. He only managed to get a cat in the later years of his life because before that he travelled too much. And Foss came into his life, and the two of them just comforted each other. And he wrote limericks about Foss. He did pictures of Foss. He illustrated an alphabet for a child with pictures of Foss. He absolutely adored Foss, who died very shortly before Lear himself, and actually had a far more elaborate funeral than did Edward Lear himself. So I think of all the cats in my book, I became particularly attached to Foss. He really was a gorgeous cat, not in looks, but in personality.
And also in how much he was loved. I mean, that's a big part of what drove you in the book. How much did that author or that artist
Mm.
care? It wasn't just that
And
they had
writing
them.
can be a very solitary activity.
Yes,
You're
you're
sitting
right
there all
about
by
that. Yes.
yourself in a study, and to have a cat by your side to purr and to maybe sit on your manuscript. Muriel Spark thought her cat critiqued her manuscripts by sitting on them. So, yes, I
And you
think a
do
cat
write
is a
about that
great
in the
accompaniment.
introduction. Yeah, that is
Yeah.
that it is lonely. And of course a
Mm.
cat, although they might tap on your pencil or your pen or your typewriter, or I guess now in more modern times a computer, they're not half as pushy as a dog who needs going
They
out and
don't need to be
playing.
walked either. You don't have to take them out for walkies. So
Right.
you can just keep writing.
Exactly. Um, I just want you to talk a little bit more in the time we have left about your tours, because I think that that's a kind of a bonus of learning about this marvelous book, Great Writers and the Cats Who Owned Them. But also, Susannah, Say again the name of how people can learn about these tours. And Sicily and Spain sound heaven. I mean, anybody could go there. You don't have to be Australian to go.
The company is called Australians Studying Abroad, but
Okay.
anybody who just goes into my website, which is susannahfullerton.com.au, can also find links to the tours in my website. They do tend to book up very quickly. I've got a new tour in England next year, which is already fully booked with a long waiting list.
Wow.
So they do book up fast. But I love planning my tours, and I've done two different tours in the USA, one in the New England area, which of course is, Mark Twain's home, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Emily Dickinson, Robert
Right.
Frost,
Yeah.
Thoreau, so many amazing authors and so many great museums and literary homes and libraries, a real treasure trove for anyone who loves literature. And then I did the one in the Deep South. So Harper Lee, William Faulkner, Tennessee Williams, Truman Capote, and so many more. So at the moment, I don't have the American ones planned for the next couple of years, but I've got gorgeous tours in England, a sort of classic English writers tour, which goes to Jane Austen country,
Oh boy.
Rudyard Kipling's home, the Lake District for the poets and for Beatrix Potter,
Oh
the
my.
Brontes and Haworth. Uh,
It
we
sounds
spend
heaven.
time in Stratford for Shakespeare, and we go and see a play, and we visit houses, landscapes, places connected with film versions of classic novels, libraries to see rare
Oh my
editions or
goodness.
manuscripts. We dine in restaurants loved by famous writers.
Oh my.
So there's a real range, and I do love doing the tours. And ASA, or Australians Studying Abroad, is a fabulous tour company. Everything's incredibly well planned, you're well looked after. And of course, you're traveling with people who love books, history, travel. So lots of like minded people. And I've made
It
wonderful friends through my tours
sounds
over the years.
it
So I
sounds
hope to keep doing
divine.
them for a long time.
I hope you will, because I think a lot of people, after they get this marvelous book, great writers and the cats who owned them. Susannah Fullerton, a wonderful book, and obviously you've devoted your life in wonderful ways to enriching everybody else's life. Thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on this marvelous book.
Thank you. It's been really lovely talking to you and meeting you. And hi to lots of American readers out there. I do hope that you love my book.
I think they will. Take care.
Thanks, Tracy.